Is this even on? Is this camera even working? I can never even tell if the camera's working. Anyway, if the camera's not working, I'll speak loudly so you can all hear me wherever you're at. Anyway, everybody, welcome to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown. All 3 books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Now today I am going to be sharing with you my top 10 favorite fantasy characters that I've ever read in fantasy novels ever. I mean, this is going to encompass the history of my entire history of reading fantasy novels. And it's an extensive history. I mean, I've been reading fantasy novels for the last 12,000 years. I mean, I started reading fantasy novels when I was just a kid in the 80s. And I've been reading ever since. I mean, I've got a library here full of over 5,000 books. And so that is a lot of books to pull from when you want to narrow down a top 10 list of fantasy novels. So anyway, let's get to it. Now, there's going to be some things. I mean, every top 10 list, I can see it now. I can already predict. I'm going to tell you my top 10 list. In the comments, people are going to type in, your top 10 list is garbage because you didn't include this character. Your top 10 list is nonsense because you didn't include this character. Or how could you have forgotten this character? That's okay. I don't mind those comments. In fact, I encourage everybody to comment about their favorite fantasy characters in the comments. But we're going to set up a few ground rules for this video. This video is going to include fantasy characters that are in sword and sorcery type fantasy. That's why you're not going to see Harry Dresden. That's more of a urban fantasy. Or Harry Potter. None of the Harrys are going to make the list. Let's just get that out of the way. Sword and sorcery type novels. Another rule is this is my list of my favorite characters. You might like some of them. You might not like any of them. That's okay. Let me know. But it is a subjective list. This is my list. Most of you are going to hate it. Some of you might like it. Let me know what you think. Another rule, top 10 lists. If any of you have ever watched any of my top 10 lists in the past, you know that I compile my list of top 10, and then I'm just like, oh, but what about this? I forgot about this character that I loved so much as a kid. I forgot about this character that just came out a few years ago that the writer was just Red is such a dynamite character. And so then it grows to a top 12 list. And then I'm like, but what about these? And then I'm like, oh, but what about, and then it's a top 15 list. And then, so what I've done is I've created a top 20 list. I know the title of the video says top 10 favorite fantasy characters. You're actually going to get 20, which is good for you, the viewer, because that's double your money's worth, I think, something like that. And, you know, one of the caveats of this is this list is going to comprise characters that I thought the author did a great job writing. Maybe I didn't like the character, but it was written so well. Some of the characters on this list are just going to be based off of pure nostalgia. Like, this is a character that I loved as a kid, and whenever I think of it, I still have great fondness. So it's going to be a mix of a lot of different things. So let's get started with the top 20 favorite fantasy characters that I've ever read. And we will start in high fashion. Top 20, starting with number 23. Conan the Barbarian. That's right. I loved Conan books ever since I was a kid. I've been reading and collecting them for a long time. I love Conan. In fact, my very, very first ever rated R movie my parents ever let me watch was the original Conan the Barbarian that came out, and I can still to this day remember my mom sitting there just beside herself in worry and heartache as every rated R scene would come up. She would just be like, oh, I can't believe I can't believe we're letting him watch this. Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, another one. I can't believe, naked people. Oh, violence. I can't believe our son is watching this. She thought she was the worst mother in the world for letting me watch this, but I loved every second of it. I was obsessed. That's number 23. Number 22 on my list is a more modern character, and that is from the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson, and that is Shalon. Now, Shalon is represented here in this great illustration by Michael Whelan, and a reason I love Shalon is she's a young woman off on an adventure by herself. She's also an artist. I grew up as a young artist. I relate to that. And I just enjoy her character and how she interacts with the other characters in the book. And her journey, I'm loving it. It's not over yet. We don't know what happens to her. And the other thing that I love about this character is, on a publishing note, Tor Books, along with Brandon Sanderson, had the foresight and the great wisdom to include in the pages of the book a lot of the illustrations that and the drawings that Shalon does. And I thought that was great. So, I think this is number 21. But this is actually two characters. I really loved the Dragon Prince series by Melanie Ron. And I loved the main two characters, Rohan and Scion. I don't know if I'm saying Scion right. It's spelled S-O-I-N-E-D. It might be Sinead, might be Soined, I don't know. But Rohan and Scion is my favorite love story in any fantasy series of all. I just like everything about it. It's very adventurous. There's dragons. There's another great Michael Whelan painting, like I mentioned. Those are two great characters. Now, I know two characters in one book might be breaking the rules a little, but let's break the rules again and do Tiger and Dell from Jennifer Robinson's Sword Singer novel, Sword Dancer. This is Sword Dancer. I think there's one of the books is called Sword Singer, but it's a series of about 7 or 8 books about Tiger and Dell. And they are two barbarian swordsmen. Well, one's a swordswoman. Tiger is a barbarian from the south. Dell is this swordswoman barbarian from the north. And they get together and they have such a great chemistry. And they go on so many cool adventures. They are some of my favorite characters of all time. And I started this series when I was a kid too. It's dope. Speaking of fantastic duos in fantasy, probably one of the classic fantasy duos was Fafard and the Grey Mouser by Fritz Leiber. Now, Fafard and the Grey Mouser were a pair of thieves that were they were the original. I mean, this series came out in the 60s. And again, we got another great Michael Whelan painting of Fafard, the big barbarian, and the Grey Mouser, the little thief. And they go on about 6 or 7 books of fantastic adventures. The interplay, their wit, their sarcasm, how they take no crap from anybody. Two great characters. Now, The Crown of Stars, a 7-book series by Kate Elliott. My writing gets compared a lot to Kate Elliott. In world building, just the way I write my characters and everything. A lot of comparisons between Kate Elliott's series and mine. Well, and one of the reasons is because the main conflict is religious in both of our series. And one of the main characters in this series is a young girl named Liath, L-I-A-T-H. And she is set upon by a religious zealot who kind of pines for her in a very creepy way. And that's the beginning of her adventures. She's a small town girl, ends up trying to get away from this guy, going on a grand adventure. And I love her story arc. I just love it a lot. And Liath is one of my favorite characters in the Crown of Stars series by Kate Elliott. Speaking of great young female characters, The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan introduces us to a girl named Helena, a young girl who is she has a mentor. Like, she's kind of an orphan girl. She gets this mentor who is an investigator, like a policeman, like a fantasy world policeman, where he goes from town to town investigating crimes and dealing with evil people and trying to set things straight. And she is sort of the deputy underneath his, sheriff. And my gosh, what a cool concept. I love the fact that these books so far in this series are not about saving the world from the Dark Lord, but they're just about these investigations that these characters go upon. And Helena is just such a cool vehicle to see this world through. And I like the adventures that she goes on. The relationships she builds in this series are great. one of the more, I mean, this only came out a couple of years ago, one of the better novels of fantasy to come out in the last 10 years. Oh, this one's going to be controversial. Thomas Covenant by Stephen R. Donaldson. Yeah, Thomas Covenant. This guy, this Thomas Covenant guy, I hate him. I mean, he's a leper. Parts of his body are falling off of him. He's whiny. He cries about everything. He doesn't believe anything that anybody tells him. In fact, his name is Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, just because he's so skeptical and cynical about everything. Woe's me, he's a victim of everything and everyone, and that's why we like him. Some of these characters that I'm going to mention, we like because they're so objectionable. And Thomas Covenant was really sort of the first ever anti-hero in the fantasy genre. And it was the way in which Stephen Donaldson wrote the guy that people were repulsed by him and rooting for him all at the same time almost. Absolutely, this is one of those characters that's my favorite, not because I liked the guy, but just because the writer did such a masterful job of giving us someone. Okay, speaking of objectionable characters, George Ancroft from The Prince of Thorns. I mean, this is like my, I think we're at number 14. This is number 15. Talk about anti-heroes. Oh my gosh, this is a modern anti-hero. I mean, I just read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I think The Prince of Thorns and George Ancroft are sort of like the equivalent to Cormac McCarthy's The Kid, where everything is just sociopathic, bloody, grim sociopathy. And anyway, and I don't even know if I'm saying George Ancroft right. I mean, it's spelled Jorjg. I don't know if that's George, Jorge, I don't know. But anyway, great character. Oh, The Assassin's Apprentice. I love Fitz chivalry, and nobody does characterization quite like Robin Hobb. This is number 14. Fitz chivalry from The Assassin's Apprentice and all of the Realm of the Elderlings books. Fitz chivalry, I love. Just, again, another kind of wayward young coming-of-age boy story of a young orphan boy. And let's talking of orphan boys, number 13 is Garion from the Belgariad. Another orphan farm boy. And I relate to orphan farm boys, folks. I mean, I was once an orphan. Well, I was adopted. I mean, for the most of my life, I never knew my biological heritage. I'd never met a blood relative. So when there's a lot of these orphan farm boys, and I know that the orphan farm boy trope gets crapped on a lot, but, you know, being grown up on a farm in the desert, when characters like Luke Skywalker showed up, I really related to him. And so Garion was another one of those that came along that I really enjoyed his journey through life as he found out who he was. Jimmy the Hand from Raymond Feist's Rift War Saga. I loved this character. I read these when I was a kid, and Jimmy the Hand was a young thief. He's right there. And he just, whenever he was on screen, he stole the scene of every, I mean, he was this plucky young thief, young kid. Again, those orphan, whether they're farm boys or thieves, I like him. But Jimmy the Hand was a dope character. Another orphan farm boy is next, and that is Terran, the Black Cauldron. Lloyd Alexander, you know, his Terran series of 5 books, the Prydain Chronicles. We've got Terran here, another young orphan farm boy. And then we've got Elenwy, who, so this is another duo. Both of these are going to make my list. Elenwy and Terran. And Elenwy was one of my first ever, probably my first ever literary crush that I ever had. I wanted her for a girlfriend. She was mouthy, she was hard to get along with, and she was a redhead, and I just fell in love with her from the jump. And so we will go, this is number 11, goes to Terran and Elenwy of Lloyd Alexander's Prydain Chronicles. Now we're to the top 10 finally. Top 10. Let's bust this out. Okay. Y'all recognize this cover. Lan. He was my favorite. Of all of the characters in The Wheel of Time, it was Lan. He was the no-nonsense, guy leading this group of teenagers, and he didn't put up with their crap. He was a good mentor to them, and he was just cool. Every time anything bad was going down, Lan was there to save the day. I liked Lan a lot. He's my favorite Wheel of Time character, and he's done great illustration by Daryl K. Sweet, just showing his badassness. That's number 10. Number 9. Number 9 is Vladimir Taltos from Stephen Brust's Vladimir Taltos series. Vladimir Taltos is the wisecracking, cynical, funny, adventurous thief slash assassin slash spy that adventures through the Dragarian Empire, and he's got his little dragon companion that rides around on his shoulder. Vladimir Taltos, these stories are fun. They're short. I love this series, and Vladimir Taltos is just super badass, dope, and fire, and all the other things that the young kids call stuff. Which leads us to Severian, the Book of the New Sun series. The Shadow of the Torturer, Severian, the ex-torturer, and here he is, represented by this great Don Mates painting. Just a cool dude adventuring through a crazy fantasy landscape, looking for himself, and he's just the perfect vehicle. This is one of the, you just got to watch my reviews of this. And if you want to watch a review of any of this stuff, I've done reviews of most of these books. And to find these reviews, all you need to do is type in go to your YouTube search bar, type in my last name, Durfee, the title of the book, and that video will magically appear upon your television screen or computer screen or phone. I don't care. I'm not here to judge what you watch the internet on. But anyway, that's how you look for the... But this is... I did a review of each of the books in this series, and you can... I just told you how you could find them. Elric of Melniboné, my favorite albino swordsman. One of my favorite fantasy characters as a kid and into my young adult years, and into my middle-age years. He's still one of my favorites. Elric of Melniboné. This is just another dark character. Another, not quite as dark as Thomas Covenant, but this guy is a brooding, emo-type, chemical romance listening dude. Anyway, so, let's see. This is number 8, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Number 7. Let's do some Dragonlance. When I was a kid, Dragonlance was the epitome of literature. I thought it was the greatest story ever told. And my favorite character was Tannis, a half-elven, who is represented right here in this great Larry Elmore painting. Now, Tannis, a half-elven, I mean, I just like half-elves. I like guys who are half human and half elf. And Tannis, I loved his adventure and all the different sort of romantic entanglements he would get into, and how he was sort of the straight man in this company of crazy adventurers. I just liked him. Liked Tannis a lot. Another controversy. This one's going to be controversial here, folks. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. My 5th. We're at number 5 now, guys. Number 5, and it's Game of Thrones. This is going to be controversial because I'm going to tell you right now my favorite characters in Game of Thrones were Arya Stark and her sister Sansa Stark. I think they were the best characters in the story, both in the book and in the TV show. I liked those characters. I loved the way George R.R. Martin wrote them in the books, and I loved the way the two actresses played the parts in the series. My favorite 2 characters from Game of Thrones, Arya and Sansa. You can crap on me in the comments for that if you like. Number 4, Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. That's right. When I was a kid and I read about this ranger, Strider, just the wisest guy in the wilderness, always in the wilderness. He was like the mountain man. He was like the cowboy. He was like the gunslinger of Middle-earth. He was just a badass, and everything about him was cool. And in a book full of so many cool characters like Frodo and Gandalf and Legolas and Galadriel, Aragorn outshone all of them. Top three, folks, top three. And we are going to talk about Thieves' World and a character that, one of the characters that really changed my life. And that is Hans Shadowspawn. Now, Hans is a thief in the Thieves' World book. There's 12 books in the Thieves' World series. Hans is the middle guy. In this inn full of rough-looking characters, Hans Shadowspawn is the middle guy. And and he was a thief, and he was a badass thief. And he was the baddest-ass character in this book, in this series. And I wanted to be Hans Shadowspawn. I wanted to be him so much that even in junior high, as I would turn in school assignments, I would sign them as Hans Shadowspawn. I was delusional. I was delusional. But a great character. Now we're to the top two. Now we are to the top two, and the Simon from Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Again, we're talking about another orphan farm boy, and as you know, I love the orphan farm boys. We'll edit that out. And the cough. Simon, another orphan farm boy. I related to this character so much as I was reading it as a young man. Just a beloved character. This is one of those nostalgia characters. Very well written by Tad Williams, one of the best writers in fantasy, Tad Williams, and one of the best, most well-drawn young fantasy orphan, not a farm boy, but a kitchen scullion, a castle scullion. Goes off on an adventure and does all the great things that young orphan bastards do when they go off on these adventures, and another great Michael Whelan painting. My number one favorite fantasy character of all time is Shay Omsford from The Sword of Shannara. Now, this is The Sword of Shannara. Shay is not on the cover, but he is the main character. He is an orphan farm boy again. And The Sword of Shannara was the first ever fantasy book I ever read. Shay Omsford, orphan farm boy. I've already told you that I have a fondness for the orphan farm boys. Back then, they represented me. Now I am going to represent them. Because the farm boy that's an orphan with a destiny gets a bad rap nowadays. People hate the trope. But I am here to bring the trope back. And I say Shay Omsford is my favorite fantasy character because he's the first ever fantasy book I ever read. Fantasy character, orphan farm boy. I will show you a picture of him. I mean, here's a photo of him. It's not a photo, it's a painting. He's the one in the middle with the sword. Well, it looks like they're all holding swords. Trust me, he's in this painting, Mr. Shay Omsford is. And he is my favorite fantasy character of all time. And now a lot of you are like, okay, there's booing. I can hear the boos and hisses. I can hear people, people are throwing tomatoes at me now. And it's just like, they're like, seriously? The Shannara guy? The Shay Holmes, the Shannara, that's your favorite. I mean, you could have picked somebody from a Stephen Erickson novel or a Joe Abercrombie or a John Gwynne or any number of people, and you went with the Shannara guy? Yeah, I did. Like I said, it's my list. It's my list. And I related to orphan farm boys because I was one. And it's my list. And Shay Omsford is the best fantasy character in the history of the entire fantasy genre.